Grace grew up knowing hunger, shame, and the quiet pain of being poor. She learned early how to smile through suffering and hide tears behind strength. When she met Daniel, he was poor like her, but his heart was rich with kindness. He loved her without fear, without pride, without conditions. He walked her home every evening, shared his last meal with her, and spoke of dreams that did not include money, but included love. Grace felt safe with him, seen by him, understood by him, but safety did not pay. Bills and love did not silence the voices that mocked her poverty every day. Grace watched other girls wear fine clothes, carry shiny phones, and walk proudly beside wealthy men. She watched her mother struggle, cough through the night, and cry silently. When food ran out, the pressure grew heavy in her chest. She began to fear a future that looked exactly like her past: endless struggle, endless sacrifice, endless pain. Then Victor came. He was rich, confident, and well-dressed. He promised comfort, security, and a life without suffering. He spoke of houses, travel, and a future where Grace would never beg again. Daniel begged her to stay. His voice shook as he reminded her of their promises under the old tree, where they first spoke of forever. Grace cried. As she looked away, she told herself love was not enough. She told herself she was choosing survival. But when she walked away from Daniel, her heart cracked quietly inside her. Victor smiled, but Grace felt hollow that night. She cried into her pillow, whispering Daniel's name like a prayer. She was ashamed to say life with Victor was loud and beautiful on the outside. Expensive dinners, bright lights, and soft beds, but Grace felt alone in rooms filled with luxury. Victor did not listen. He did not ask about her fears. He did not hold her when she cried. He only reminded her that he had saved her from poverty. Slowly, love turned into control. Kind words turned into silence. Affection turned into distance. Grace realized too late that riches could not replace the warmth of genuine love. One evening, she saw Daniel again. He was thinner, quieter, but his eyes still carried the same gentle truth. When their eyes met, something shattered inside her. She saw pain. She had caused pain. He never spoke. He smiled politely, nodded, and walked away without a word. Grace stood frozen, her chest burning, her breath heavy. In that moment, she understood what she had lost that night. Grace knelt beside her bed and cried until her body shook. She cried for Daniel. She cried for herself. She cried for the choice she could never undo: die. The regret settled deep in her soul like a wound that refused to heal. She had chosen riches over love, and now she would carry that decision forever. Grace's life with Victor did not become easier. It became colder each morning. She woke in a soft bed, yet felt emptier than she ever felt sleeping on a mat with Daniel. Victor provided everything: money, clothes, comfort, but never warmth, never patience, never love. He spoke to her like a possession, not a partner, reminding her often that he rescued her from poverty. His words cut deeper than hunger ever had. Grace began to miss the small things: the sound of Daniel's laughter, the way he listened, the way he noticed her. Sadness before she spoke. She carried regret, silently smiling in public while breaking in private. Nights became long and sleepless. She stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment she turned away from Daniel, wondering how one decision could destroy a lifetime. Victor grew distant and harsh. He criticized the way she spoke, the way she dressed, the way she existed. If she cried, he called her weak. If she asked for affection, he reminded her of his money. Grace began to feel trapped, rich in appearance, poor in spirit. She stopped calling home often because she did not want her mother to hear the emptiness in her voice. Her heart felt buried beneath luxury, slowly suffocating. Regret became her shadow, following her everywhere. One afternoon, she heard Daniel had left the village. No goodbye, no explanation. He disappeared the same way she had disappeared from his life. The news crushed her chest. She collapsed on the floor of her expensive room and cried, uncontrollably, realizing the man who truly loved her was gone forever. That night, she whispered apologies into the darkness, knowing they would never reach him. Her body began to weaken. She lost appetite, sleep, and joy. Doctors found nothing wrong, but Grace knew the sickness lived in her heart. Victor noticed her silence and accused her of ingratitude, reminding her again of the life she would have lived without him. His words became chains tightening around her soul. She learned to cry quietly so no one would hear. Grace understood then that riches could buy silence but not peace, comfort but not love, security but not happiness. She had traded genuine love for material safety, and the cost was unbearable. Her regret was no longer hidden. It was consuming her from inside. She walked through halls of wealth, feeling like a prisoner of her own choice. Each night, she prayed not for riches, but for forgiveness. She prayed for Daniel's safety, happiness, and peace, even if it was without her tears, soaked her pillow as guilt wrapped around her heart. She realized too late that love once lost never returns in the same form. Grace carried her regret, silently burying it beneath silk clothes and painted smiles. But inside, she was screaming, a woman who chose wealth and lost herself a heart that traded love and paid with pain. Grace's body finally began to fail under the weight of regret and silence. She collapsed one morning while dressing for a dinner. She did not want to attend. The cold marble floor pressed against her skin as Victor stood over her, annoyed instead of afraid. Doctors came and went, using words like stress, exhaustion, and emotional trauma. But Victor only complained about embarrassment. When Grace woke, she felt emptier than ever, not just in her heart but in her soul. Tears came without warning, soaking pillows, walls, and memories. She no longer had the strength to hide her pain. News reached her days later that Daniel's mother had died. The woman who once fed Grace when she was hungry, who prayed for her, who called her daughter, was gone. Grace screamed until her throat burned and her chest ached. Victor refused to let her attend the burial, saying her past had no place in his life. That night, something inside Grace finally broke. She cried until morning, clutching her chest, feeling her heart tear apart piece by piece. Victor's cruelty grew worse. He reminded her daily that she owed him everything. He controlled where she went, who she spoke to, and how she smiled. He called it care, but it felt like a prison. Grace stopped arguing, stopped hoping, stopped resisting. Her eyes lost their light, her voice became quiet, her body moved, but her soul stayed buried. One night she dreamed of Daniel, standing under the old tree, smiling softly and reaching for her. She ran toward him, crying, but woke before touching him. The pain was unbearable, she realized. Then the love she abandoned was the only place her heart ever felt safe. Grace stopped eating completely. Doctors warned of danger. Victor called her weak. Grace accepted the suffering, believing it was punishment for choosing riches over love. She prayed no longer for happiness, only for rest. Regret wrapped around her heart like a rope, tightening with every breath. She finally understood that some choices cannot be repaired. Some love once lost never returned. She had buried her regret, but it grew roots inside her, choking her slowly. Love had been real once, and she traded it for wealth. Now all she owned was pain. Grace's world collapsed completely when Victor stopped pretending to care at all. He no longer hid his cruelty or his disgust. He spoke to her only to insult her or remind her she was nothing without his money. He brought other women into the house, openly laughing loudly, while Grace lay weak in the bedroom, listening to the sounds of betrayal tear through her chest. Her heart no longer broke because it was already destroyed. She felt only numbness, heavy and suffocating, like she was buried alive. One morning, a letter arrived from the village. Grace's hands trembled as she opened it, her heart racing with fear and hope. The words inside crushed her soul. Daniel was dead. A road accident, sudden and unforgiving. He was gone forever. The paper slipped from her fingers, and she fell to the floor screaming until her voice disappeared. Her body shook violently as reality pressed down on her chest. The man she loved, the man she left, the man she regretted losing was gone. She cried until her eyes burned and her breath came in painful gasps. She begged God, begged time, begged life to take her back to the day she chose riches over love.
Ow.
She would give everything back, the house, the clothes, the money, even her life, just to see Daniel once more, just to say sorry, just to tell him she loved him. But death does not listen, and time does not return. Victor watched her pain with cold, empty eyes and said nothing. No comfort, no regret, no mercy. That silence broke her more than any insult. Grace realized she was truly alone. Her regret had no witness, her pain had no comfort, her suffering had no end. Days passed, and Grace stopped speaking. She refused food, water, light. Her body weakened, her breath slowed. Nurses whispered she was giving up. Victor signed papers without reading them, already planning his life without her. Grace no longer cared. She spoke softly to Daniel in her thoughts every night, telling him she was sorry, telling him she chose wrong, telling him she loved him. Tears soaked her pillow as she whispered his name until sleep carried. Her away Grace finally understood that some regrets never heal. They do not fade. They do not forgive. They stay buried in the heart, growing heavier with time. She had chosen wealth and buried her regret, but it rose stronger and consumed her completely. Her life became a warning, a story of love abandoned and a heart destroyed by one irreversible choice. Grace days blurred into nights without distinction until time itself felt meaningless. She walked through rooms filled with luxury, yet felt nothing at all. The silks, the gold, the fine meals, the chandeliers, and endless mirrors could not touch thee. Emptiness rotting quietly in her chest, Victor. Mansion was enormous, yet suffocating every hallway, echoing with a silence that screamed louder than sound. Victor had grown completely indifferent. His laughter with other women drifted through the house. Careless, sharp, and humiliating sound, striking her heart like nails hammered into a coffin lid. She no longer recognized herself in the mirror. The woman staring back had hollow eyes drained of light lips, pale and trembling, a body grown thin and fragile, but the pain inside her heart was alive, burning, relentless, refusing rest every memory of. Daniel cut through her soul like fire, slicing deeper each time. She saw him everywhere in reflections, shadows, and passing strangers. The street where they first met, the river where they once promised forever, the old tree beneath which he whispered love. With trembling hope, she remembered the warmth of his hands, the steadiness of his voice, the way he looked at her as if she were the only miracle life had given him. She imagined his laughter carried by the wind, and each vision shattered her anew. What haunted her most was not simply his death, but the truth that she had walked away, while he was still alive, still waiting, still believing. In her she remembered the night she chose Victor, the glow of headlights, the heavy scent of wealth, the way fear of poverty outweighed loyalty. She remembered Daniel's eyes filled with confusion and hurt as she turned away, telling herself she was being wise, practical, realistic. Those words once sounded powerful. Now they tasted like poison and ash. Victor Mansion grew colder as months passed. Servants moved softly, avoiding her gaze, whispering behind doors as though sorrow were contagious. Doctors came offering tonics and calm reassurances, but none could reach the wound buried deep in her soul. Victor spoke to her rarely, and when he did, it was with irritation, as though her sadness were a defect she had failed to conceal. She became an object in his house, a decoration fading quietly in the background. One evening, news arrived that the village where Daniel had lived would hold a remembrance, not a funeral those had passed years ago, but a gathering for those who still carried him in their hearts. When Grace read the invitation, her hand shook violently. Hope, painful, fragile, and cruel, stirred within her chest. For a moment she imagined standing where he once stood, hearing his name spoken with love when she showed Victor. He dismissed it without looking, saying the past had no place in their life, forbidding her to go, as if erasing memory could erase guilt. Something inside her finally shattered. She collapsed onto the marble floor, shaking violently, her breath breaking into sobs that felt endless. She wanted to scream until her throat tore open. She wanted to run barefoot into the night. She wanted to disappear into the earth and join the man she had truly loved. She cried for hours, uncontrollably beating the cold floor until her hands bled and her knuckles split, yet the physical pain brought no relief. The regret she had buried for years rose like a flood, drowning her, crushing what little strength remained. She whispered apologies into the darkness again and again, telling Daniel she was sorry, that she chose wrong, that she loved him more than life itself, that every breath she took without him felt like punishment. She begged forgiveness from a soul who would never hear her, and that silence destroyed her more than anger ever could. That night she understood a truth she had spent years denying. The riches she traded for love had no power to heal. No gold could bring him back. No comfort could fill the void. Victor wealth became her prison, a gilded cage where every luxury mocked her loss. Her body weakened, her spirit bent under the crushing weight of memory. Yet somewhere, deep beneath the ruins, a faint spark of the girl she once was still whispered, "You survived, you lived, you endured." Though dim, that spark refused to die. Grace spent days alone in the vast silence of the mansion, listening to rain tap against the windows, counting each drop as if it were a tear she had cried and forgotten. She thought of Daniel constantly, the love she abandoned, the life she destroyed, the future she traded for comfort and sorrow. Filled every fiber of her being, she whispered his name over and over into empty rooms, praying he had known she loved him, praying he had understood her choice, even though it broke them both. Nights became unbearable. Sleep brought no peace. Only dreams where Daniel stood just out of reach, smiling sadly before fading away. Each morning she woke, gasping, clutching her chest as though her heart might finally give up. Days later, she left the house without permission. For the first time in years, her body was weak, her steps slow, yet something inside her was determined. She walked alone to the river, near the estate, the same kind of river where she and Daniel once dreamed. Allowed of a simple life together, the rain poured freely, soaking her clothes, mixing with tears she no longer tried to hide. She knelt by the water, letting the cold seep into her skin, grounding her in reality. She cried not only for Daniel, but for herself, for the girl who believed safety mattered more than love. She whispered into the wind, "I am sorry. I am sorry. I love you always." The words carried no hope of reply, yet releasing them eased something heavy that had been crushing her chest. For years she stayed there, until exhaustion replaced sorrow, until her sobs faded into silence. In that stillness, clarity emerged. Sharp and unforgiving life could not undo the past. No amount of wealth could replace true love. Some choices demanded a price so high they consumed a soul entirely. Even in that painful understanding, she realized she was still breathing, still standing, still alive. She could carry the pain without letting it erase what remained of her. She could honor Daniel. Memory not by dying with regret, but by living with honesty, even if joy came only in fragile moments. When she returned to the mansion, its walls felt different, smaller, less powerful.
Oh.
Victor no longer frightened her with his control or indifference. She saw clearly now that she had already survived the greatest loss imaginable. Her heart was scarred beyond repair, yet it continued to beat stubborn and defiant. She walked through halls of gold and marble, no longer mistaking them for happiness. She understood that luxury without love was emptiness. Dressed in beauty she had loved deeply, chosen wrongly, and paid with years of unbearable sorrow. She had mourned silently, suffered endlessly, and endured when she thought she could not endure. Another moment, and still she stood, a woman shaped by love, regret, and survival, a soul permanently marked, yet alive. She had buried her regret for years, but when it finally surfaced, it taught her the deepest truths of life: that love is fragile and precious, that choices echo forever, that pain can coexist with strength, and that even a shattered heart can continue beating and moving forward, carrying its scars as proof that it once loved fully and lost everything.